Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, or if you are west of me or east of me on the East Coast, good evening. But welcome to what we are so excited about today, which is an event really focusing on the wealth, financial health, and state of the native asset building field. So if that's what you've come to hear about, you are certainly in the right place. If you're in the wrong place, just stay, because this is going to be a really exciting, engaging, and I hope activating conversation. My name is Joanna Vermonte. I'm the managing director of the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. We are co-hosting this event with two national leaders on Native issues, the Center for Native American Youth, CNAY, and they are pals of ours within the Aspen Institute, and the national organization, the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition, or ONAC. Don't be confused by that. Oklahoma, that's their origin story, but their work now is national and everywhere. A few things getting into this conversation. First of all, I know we're many years now into this Zoom world of events, but we really hope that you can be active and engaged through our chat channel. We will be posting things in there. We would love to hear your questions in time for the end of the session where we'll be doing Q&A. And you all are experts in your areas of work too. So resources you have, ideas you have, all of it, please put it in the chat for all of our education and help and conversation. So that's the first thing. The second is, where did this conversation even come from? And last year, we co-published, the Financial Security Program, co-published with the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, a book on the future of wealth building, and really looking at through 63 different essays and 100 plus different authors, what would it really mean to substantively and durably change the balance sheets of households in this country so that they're more positive, so that there's more shared prosperity, so that there's more wealth. A whole bunch of gaps came into the forefront as we were doing this work with the authors and their really novel and important ideas. That there are gender gaps in this issue around wealth. There are geographic gaps. There are generational gaps. There's disability and ability gaps. There's, of course, race and ethnic gaps that we talk about a lot. But really importantly, and why we're here today, is that there are, in addition to all of those and the intersection of those, that there are sovereign identity gaps. And we really need to focus and think about that more. And there are very customized, different solutions that respect the community, history, and tribal sovereignty of Native communities in this country. So I'm going to invite two just amazing leaders in this field of Native asset building, Christy Fensel and Karen Edwards, to join me on stage, turning on their videos. They are also a contributor to the book and an essay we have there. I want to say one quick thing, and then I'm going to read a quote from your essay, friends, and then I'm going to get into the conversation with you. But one is that I want to just reinforce and remind everyone in this session with us that we have to keep in mind and really respect that the financial access barriers in Native communities were and still are, frankly, systemic, intentional, and exclusionary by design. So it's specific, and there was a purpose for that. And because of that, it leads to different kinds of solutions, effort, and frankly, commitment on all our part to solve for it with leaders like Christy and Karen. All right, so you guys wrote this really important essay in the book on what to do, like what are the really important asset building models in Native communities and what do they mean? I'm gonna just read this quote for everyone on the call because it really sums up how to get into the right creative and accurate headspace for what communities are asking for, what community members themselves are saying they need and respect and value. So ONAC, these folks on the call, works from a Native asset building framework that acknowledges that assets are understood in Native communities to involve much more than money or financial success. Tribal sovereignty, Native languages and arts, natural resources such as water, kinship, housing, education, food security, and family, as well as commonly held assets such as land, are considered to be significant assets in Native communities, assets that must be protected and strengthened. So starting from there, Christy, I think I'll ask you this question first, but definitely need to hear Karen's input on this. You know, we have over in this country 574 federally recognized tribes, and that does not even account for everyone, right? That's just what the government has said is there. There's so much diversity there by experiences, by identities, and yet the need to scale is essential. So I'm wondering, you know, given what I read from your essay, and there's so much more in the essay, please everyone take, if all the 60 plus essays in the book, this is the one I need everyone to start with, and we have the links for that in the chat. But Christy, I'm wondering from your perspective, like, where do you start with scaling? What is the model you think is most scalable given the geography, the diversity, all of the differences out there? And what kind of excites you about the ability to make a real difference here?
Thank you. I just want to say there's going to be a little bit of mowing noise next door. That just apologize. Okay.
And we are living the life we are living. Mow away, neighbor, mow away.
So as Joanna mentioned, I'm Christy Fensel, and I am a citizen of the Osage Nation, and I've been directing ONAC since 2011. And ONAC is a 21-year-old asset building coalition. And so we've been thinking about this piece on scaling and, you know, what infrastructure is already in place. And so we just wanted to share that kind of with ONAC, but also just in general within the last 20 years, there's been tremendous growth in the native asset building field. And where this kind of plays out would be, for example, with children's savings accounts. So in 2020, we published a report where we articulated and kind of documented all of the child savings initiatives we were aware of in the country. And so, you know, following from what Joanna just mentioned about this broader understanding of assets, the children that are participating in this are exposed to their native arts and native languages as well, because it's all integrated into the programming. And so there's really been a lot of activity around child savings initiatives. And so in terms of the infrastructure, it's there, right? Also, let's talk about native community development financial institutions. So they've recently had the opportunity to have some more funding resources, and they have continued to expand the loans they're making for businesses and for homes, but also, you know, helping to build community assets as well, which is really crucial. So for example, with a business incubator that serves tribal citizens within a certain tribal community. Additionally, you know, we think about I think VITA, so volunteer income tax assistant.
I was going to ask you about that because it's a great announcement this week about all the success. Yeah.
So really VITA, I mean, they're, for example, Cherokee Nation, they've had a 37-year-old VITA program. That's very impressive. And so they and a number of other VITA practitioners continue to provide these free tax preparation services, also the child tax credit outreach. They've been able to navigate lots of challenges with having to go remote and figuring out some of the technology, but still doing it in person as they're able to because of the trust factor. And so really like native administered VITA programs are keeping funds in the local community, which increases and supports tribal sovereignty. So we just want to call out that really that has been an important piece of the native asset building field for quite a while. And finally, financial coaching. So ONAC in the last 2 years has started to offer free financial coaching to any American Indian or Alaska Native, regardless of where they reside. It's by phone and teleconference. But also we have tribal programs across the country that are offering coaching as they have the resources to do it. And then Native CDFIs are as well. So really lots to be proud of there and a lot of innovations. In the essay, we tried to outline kind of what ONAC's model is for an integrated or wraparound asset building model or service delivery system. And so we wear a few different hats. One hat is that we are a direct service provider. So by that, we seed fund children's savings accounts, emergency savings accounts, emergency cash assistance, down payment assistance. We provide the financial coaching. So all of those pieces together. And we try to work with families so that they have options to grow assets for all their family members. So children's savings accounts, obviously for the younger ones, parents with an emergency savings account to save for a rainy day, all those pieces kind of come together. And so we think that this integrated approach works. We have all systems in place and we're ready to scale that. And I think our partners, many of them are trying to do integrated approaches as well. It's really critical when we're so far behind to have that option. And so kind of trying to think about how to make that work.
Yeah,
So
and
really,
I mean, it's, oh, I'm sorry, finish your thought. Yeah, no, please. Go ahead.
so basically that, infrastructure's in place. We have a strong track record of success. We're ready to scale. And I just wanted to give my colleague Karen an opportunity to also respond to this question. So she's a citizen of the Choctaw Nation, and she was founder for ONAC. She's come back out of retirement to do some special projects with us. We're really honored to continue to work with her. And I just wanted to have her have some time to also share.
Yeah,
Karen?
it would be really great to hear your perspective on this, Karen.
Thanks, Christy and Joanna. And I think Joanna alluded to policy issues in her opening remarks, and you may have read about some policy issues in the invitation to this event. And what I would like to do is expand on that a little bit as my opening remarks. I think everyone participating in this event likely realizes that some of the oldest and most popular asset building policies in the country have failed to serve much of the Native population in effective ways. Even recent asset building policies have had a lower level of uptake in Native communities than in much of the rest of the country. And low uptake of existing asset building policies is not always a policy development issue. It's not actually the way policies are created or worded. Much of the time that depends on other issues, such as lack of information sharing campaigns, spotty or confusing implementation rules, and barriers to accessing delivery of the policy. In Indian country, that last piece is mainly due to either absent or undefined delivery systems.
Mm-hmm.
So asset building policies such as earned income tax credit, IRAs, 401ks, they were slow to roll out due largely to the issues I just mentioned. 401k policy particularly took several years of policy tinkering with the tax advantage and finally a market take-up and delivery system that was created by big companies to make the policy successful. Take-up of asset building policies seems to lag the longest when there is little or no money earmarked for developing an information campaign for both those who deliver the policies and those who benefit from the policies, for creating targeted marketing strategies, for administration costs, and even for research. And many tribes may lack the resources and people power necessary to overcome these issues and barriers, so they aren't able to fully participate in implementing many asset building programs or plans. And I think until policymakers take these issues and barriers to policy implementation seriously, the policies won't be able to well serve the people who need them the most. And again, referring to what Christy just articulated so well, I think you may hear this said in some fashion several times today, that it is time to embrace a national strategy for Native asset building efforts that includes an increase in dedicated funding to benefit integrated on-the-ground asset building programs and initiatives. And these initiatives that are developed and implemented by known and trusted tribal and Native-led nonprofit entities. And I'll pass it back to Christy now.
Well, let me just pop in real quick to say I really appreciate the different perspectives you both are bringing in, because there's the what are the actual right and integrated ways of the actual programs, right, and services, and then there and how to get them to people. But then also the really important, like for scale, we do need big policy too, but it only matters if the implementation is policy all the way to the bitter end, right? We have to think all the way through, resource it properly, and bring in all the right partners until the end user actually benefits from what the policy is. And that's where there's been real breakdown. We only have 1 or 2 minutes more until we're moving on to the panelists. So again, friends, read this essay. It is rich with ideas and wisdom, and so important to the urgent action call that Karen just gave us about what is the real national campaign and approach that we're committed to. But Christy, we talked about resources really briefly. I just want, like, what is top on your mind? We can't do scale in any capacity. We can't even make policy white, right, without resources. So what's your one wish for the group around the real resource issue on this?
Sure. So yeah, that is, what's holding us back from scaling. It is resources. And so just 3 quick examples of just things that Native practitioners keep hearing.
Yeah.
And we know that we don't have enough time, so we put out 16 suggestions, and we can include it in the chat with a shortened link. Great. And so basically, what we are hearing from foundations sometimes more recently is that we don't fit into the racial equity RFPs. So either like Native communities literally are not listed as eligible to apply. And so that obviously can be a bit of a barrier. Also thinking about, you know, some of us are hearing that we serve too rural and too small of populations, but, you know, those populations still have to be served, and no one else is going to do it if we aren't doing it. So, you know, we still need the support there. Or you don't have enough staff. Well, if we're so under-resourced, if we have some more resources, I think we would hire up.
The most frustrating of it, right?
It is. It's challenging.
Because I don't have any money. I mean, right.
Right. So, you know, basically just, we tried to, you know, think about where is there an opportunity here, and what we are most asking for is flexible, multi-year funding, unrestricted funding. And we really appreciate all the tribal leaders that are on today and the tribal staff that are working tirelessly day in and day out to, you know, try to build assets in their community. For the research partners that try to include Native voices, we're really grateful for your work. For the bankers that are trying to work on banking access issues, you know, we appreciate that partnership and we need it. Also for, you know, the federal partners that are trying to break down some of the barriers and address little policy pieces sometimes that make a big difference for exclusion. So like all of those partners together can really make the difference. And we know we need to hear now from the rest of the panel. But yes, what we just wanted to say is this is an essay to start a further conversation. We know we don't have a lot of time here today, but if any of you are interested in having further events or discussion around this Native essay that was included in the book, we would be very happy to continue and bring in our partners as well, just for a very rich conversation. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Christy and Karen. And we will hopefully see you back in the Q&A. And as you said, you guys are not just available for future conversations, you're inviting future conversations and work on this. So I'll ask you guys to step aside. Please put in the 16 ideas. This is critical action steps right from leaders of the community that we need to be taking. And let me invite my colleague and pal, Nikki Pitre, onto the call to lead us through the next part of this really important event. Hey, Nikki.
Hey there, thank you so much. Hello, my relatives. My Indian name is Meadowlark, and in our ways, meadowlarks bring good medicine, and I hope to bring that to you today. My English name is Nikki Petrie, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. I greet you all with a happy heart and a warm handshake. Thank you for joining us today. We've just heard from Christy and Karen on important insights about the state of asset building in Indigenous communities, and we're so grateful to bring these issues to light in today's conversation. I'm so honored to join three leaders who inspire us and will support us in focusing our energy around best practices, opportunities to scale, and discuss the priorities of Native asset building. I'd like to start introducing our panelists, but also pose a question for them. And so I would be honored to welcome to the screen first, Sarah Echohawk, and introduce yourself and then share also what wealth means to you.
Thank you, Nikki. Nawa, hello. I'm Sarah Echohawk. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, and today I'm actually calling in from the traditional homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho here in the Boulder Valley in Colorado. And again, thank you for asking me to be here. In terms of, I'm the CEO of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. If we just call it ACES, that's a lot easier. And in terms of what wealth means to me, I think really looking at kind of that all-inclusive asset building model that Christy alluded to in terms of assets being much larger than just financial, right? So we talk about our communities and our culture and all of the things that come into that, our language and our spirituality and our religion, and then our natural resources and all of the things that really come in is what I think of as wealth. And it's really this idea of everything is interconnected.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'd like to invite Lakota in now to introduce herself.
Sorry, guys. Hi, everybody. My name is Lakota Vogel. I'm the Executive Director of Four Bands Community Fund. We're a native CDFI located up on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in north central South Dakota. And we've done quite a bit of work around wealth and what wealth means to the communities. And one of our Lakota elders named Albert Whitehat said wealth means it's more about circulation versus accumulation. So really, when natives talk about wealth, it's more of a collective perspective versus individualistic and what it can do for me, or I. It's all about the collective, as Sarah and Christy and Karen all alluded to. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for that, Lakota. Next, I'd like to invite my little brother, Rory, to the screen to introduce himself and share what wealth means to him.
Hi, my name is Rory Wheeler. I'm a citizen of the Seneca Nation, coming to you from our nation's Cattaraugus territory in snowy, or just outside snowy Buffalo, New York. I serve as a youth advisory board member for the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. And I would say wealth means to me is, as I was sitting here thinking about it, is having forums like this, is where people can get out, talk about ideas, best practices on ways we can improve our communities. That's a big thing what wealth means to me. And I like how Sarah's point about the interconnectedness, it's because it's our community, it's our culture, our values, and our ideas as well that make us unique and make us who we are, and builds that wealth within our community. So thank you for inviting me today, and happy to be here.
Thank you all so much. The reality is we as Native people are forced to navigate systems in a world that was not designed for us to thrive in. Young people, when we surveyed them at the Center for Native American Youth, have affirmed what was recently shared, and that we are well aware of the interconnectedness and intersectionality of all of our issues, especially building financial wealth. And so I'd like to invite Lakota to share recommendations for partners, policy leaders, and funders to elevate Native voices.
Thank you all. I would first always refer back to the 18 suggestions from ONAC. They did a lot of research into that, and that would be the most helpful article for you all to review. But I would say from the perspective of a 22-year-old Native organization serving populations, working on all the aspects of asset building, we really have to remember that the policy space is really important for all of us to continue to advocate. You heard a lot of mentions of data, and I think in rural populations, especially being a minority population in America, the statistics that describe indigenous societal positioning are not really disputed, but they're always based in a point of deficit, and that's not always how we talk about our community. We have to remember that data is a human artifact, and in colonizing nation states such as America, it's a raced reality, right? And you have to tease that out. This reality emerges not through mathematical and analytical techniques, but it really is viewed through social, racial, and cultural standpoints of the creators. So this is why it's really important to have natives collecting and analyzing and reporting on their own data. And when we get into the conversation of scale, oftentimes we feel pressured to produce the amount of numbers that are needed to make it empirically based. But at this point, we're standing up and saying we need to oversample the population of Native America so that we can have a representative population database for us to, create and analyze the data ourselves and tell our own narrative. And so then this leads into, policy implications for our peoples and our communities. So we really we can continue offering the programming that we're doing that Christy highlighted very well, but we really do want to advocate for collecting data locally and allowing us to analyze it, but then understanding that we can't continue to ask our populations to overcome the structural. So you can't ask our individual populations to overcome the structural barriers that exist. So that's my little pitch for policy change. And we've been doing it for years, and, reach out to any Native American and they can suggest a number of policy changes for you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Sarah, you lead an amazing organization, ACES, and can you talk a little bit about the organization and how ACES is modeling building wealth across generations and geographies for Native leaders?
Sure. So yes, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society was founded about 45 years ago, and really was at that time focused on just getting more Native people into science and engineering. Fast forward to today, and it's really about all of these STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math. So where is the link, right? So why are we talking about asset building, or why am I here talking about asset building? So just to say, we really think of ourselves as a workforce development organization. And part of what was missing when I joined ACES about 9 years ago is that we were working with a lot of corporations and government agencies and helping them recruit Native STEM talent as they're graduating into these jobs. But really what that, while we want our people to have all of the options, one of the options that wasn't there was to go back home, right? Or to be at home and to use their skills at home. And so we really started working with a lot of tribes, and we have a Tribal Nations Advisory Council. And so we really want to help tribes then build their STEM educational programs and then their STEM workforce. However, in order for that to be effective, there has to be an economy in place where these folks can actually then either start a business or there have to be jobs available. So we can build a workforce, but if the infrastructure isn't there, and that includes these urban communities as well, then there's not going to be a place for these graduates and for these professionals to plug into their community and really bring those skills. So we have been doing some work in financial education with some different partners, and primarily that was approached for students in terms of financing and funding their education. So when we talk about these STEM STEM majors, it's expensive to go into a STEM program, especially if you're looking at a master's or a PhD program. And so recognizing that one of the things that we really wanted to help students and families understand is how to pay for that, how to finance it. And also, as you're coming into your career, then how do you manage your money? And how do you do that effectively and do that well? And again, for families as well as students. So that's really kind of the piece that we came into. We also recognize, because we do culturally contextualized curriculum development in the STEM fields, that we also need to do that with financial education. So that's something that we've done and have really worked on a peer-to-peer model. So everything that we offer is free, but we also then have ambassadors that work within their communities, whether urban or reservation, and we actually fund them to do that when they want to do that, because I think that's the other piece that's missing, is that a lot of this programming is put out there, but there's no funding or resources for the people then to use it or distribute it. So that's really been our approach.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's powerful work. Rory, Native youth have a large role in the future of asset building. Can you share what you've worked on in your community of the Seneca Nation? And what are some of those best practices that you believe can be scaled out?
Of course. Thank you for the question, Nikki. So a little bit of backstory. So here in the Seneca Nation, in the late 90s, early 2000s, but before that, a lot of poverty, a lot of wealth building or economic activity here within our nation and our local communities. So around the time, the late 90s, early 2000s, we really began diversing our economic activities and really gaining more wealth, rebuilding our nation, because we were at a time where some days the light bill and the payroll, we didn't have money for both of those. So it was really difficult times. I know one funny story that a counselor told me. It's not a funny story, but there were times where how appreciative we should be for the things that we have, because there were times where council members had to bring their own toilet paper to the council meeting. So there was really a lot of poverty. But as we expanded and grew our economic portfolio and the activities we're engaged in, there was a deep focus to ensure that as we grow as a nation economically, we need to grow our next generation of leaders. And so that's what the nation did, starting in the mid 2000s. Some different incentives for those that were, or some different programmings that involved for Native youth, summer internships, and different career development possibilities But one of the major things I think the Seneca Nation should be recognized for is ensuring that when we send our youth out at 18 years old, whether to school, entering a trade, or careers, that it needs to have the financial literacy to be comfortable working in an outside market. And so that's what we did. With great support of a nonprofit, we were able to develop a financial literacy program for our youth starting at age 18, or starting at age 17 actually, to have those skills, because we noticed that they weren't being taught in the local schools. The education wasn't really there, but we're really proud to implement that program back in 2000, I believe 16, during the time I was serving as a government affairs fellow for the Seneca Nation government, and was really happy to see the rollout of that programming. And it has been had major, it's been very well received as well, especially during the pandemic. Before that, there were a lot of in-person class, or in-person, but we moved to, there is a hybrid shift right now. So really proud to be part of that. And I guess what I want to say on this call is that the importance of supporting tribal governments, tribal organizations, and developing these programs is so essential. For me personally, I wasn't given those types, I didn't learn those types of skills for this program in the community, or even at our local public school. So I'm really grateful for the Seneca Nation for providing that service to us. So the call would be for, to work with tribal governments, tribal organizations, to develop these type of financial literacy programs, because they're simply not being taught. And then the younger we can get youth even engage in these processes about saving for college, saving for important expenses, those will be so key in helping youth succeed. Because Nikki said before that there's not a lot of asset building happening within Native youth. And so any program or any type of service that can be provided to get youth more thinking more clearly down the road financially is really needed, and hope to see that in the future.
Thank you so much, Rory. Those are really good words. Lakota, can you share a little bit about your important work within the Forebands Community Fund?
Sure. Excuse me. Sure, I would be happy to. So I really kind of want to go back to the integrated asset building approach that many of us have all taken on as our organizations. We really truly believe that as Native leaders within the community, sitting in the seats that we're sitting in, we have the lens and the experiences to support our community to grow its own assets. I mean, one of the things that we haven't talked about is just the idea of the valuation of Native assets across America. So it's helpful to know that there's 56 million acres of land in the United States that are held by trust or in trust by the federal government, right? 56 million acres of land that are not valued in the same way that the rest of American land is valued. And that system was created intentionally and has held back Native Americans from building wealth. With a lot of these questions that are being asked, a lot of these questions are based on the assumption that wealth is valued and calculated in the same way in Indian country, and it is absolutely not, because of trust land, right? And so in the traditional form of growing wealth, it's usually home ownership and building an asset. And that opportunity is really not given to Native Americans for very many reasons, including, asset stripping policies, as well as just not having access to capital to get a mortgage, right? So there's so many policies that are in place that don't allow our community members to access the basic financial services that the rest of America has. But what Forebands does is we bring that lens to the work with the individual who walks into our offices and says, I would like to learn more about my credit score. There's this number that's assigned to me at birth. I have no idea what that is. And can you explain to me why I can't get a car loan because somebody says I don't have a credit score? So we basically allow them to walk in and begin working on credit. We think if they take the courage to walk into our building, the least we can do is explain what a credit score does and how it impacts your trajectory as an American if you want to access the credit system, right? And so that's what we do. And then we also have the opportunity to serve people through the VITA program, the Voluntary Income Tax Assistance Program, where we get to look at their the largest cash influx to their household during the refund process, right? And we offer that service for free. And the only funder that Forbands had for serving 650 people this year was the Oklahoma Native Assets Coalition. So to serve 650 people and work with them on average about 2 hours each client, just to explain their refund and the process of accessing your refund and the information the IRS processes, we only received one funder in that space, right? And for them to get any answers, calling the 1-800 number is just not possible. And the nearest IRS tax facility is over 180 miles away. It was impossible for our rural populations to access, information from the IRS. So we do that as well. Then we work with people on building entrepreneurship because we believe building a business and growing the economy is really important. And then we also support individuals in getting mortgages. So this is the integrated approach that we're all talking about. You basically invent a product, respond to your community, and you keep building it. It's like a supply chain. You say, I got a wheel, and now I need the car to go to it. And you continuously develop products within your community to respond to the need. And that's what Forbands has done with support from, funders like ONAC, but little support to continue to grow and scale.
Thank you so much, Lakota. That's amazing. Amazing work that you're leading. I wanted to invite in Sarah and Rory. If I know you had talked about what you're doing at ACES, for example, Sarah, and Rory, you had talked about what's working well as far as financial literacy within Seneca Nation. Are there any other effective tools or platforms that Indigenous communities are using to build financial wealth and literacy?
Okay, I'll jump in first and then let Rory jump in. Obviously, and having Lakota here is perfect. There are the native CDFIs, but there are also other community organizations and other organizations as well. I think of if we're thinking about Alaska, I believe there are 2 certified CDFIs there, but in Alaska, specifically, there are 220 plus Alaska Native villages, and then there's the 13 corporations, regional corporations. And as Lakota was talking about, there really is this legal structure that makes Indigenous people here different than other ethnic minorities, right? So we have those similar challenges that other ethnic minorities have, but we also have these different legal constructs and policies that really impact our ability to build assets. So I think of organizations like Tanana, I think I said that right.
The Tanana Chiefs Conference?
Yeah, right. And so, they're a large organization in Alaska that's like an intertribal or intervillage, right, organization that is working to create some of these policies and infrastructure across all of the different communities. And they're not necessarily a bank, right, or a lending institution, but they are starting to and have been putting these programs in place. So there are definitely on the ground programs, and we talk about the importance of being in communities, but then there's stuff like ONAC and others that are doing the national work as well, and those can be equally effective because not every community has a CDFI or has an on the ground organization. So I don't think it's an either or, it's definitely a both. So I'll just leave it at that and let Rory jump in.
Yeah, so it's I don't know how to say this, but I there isn't really too much I can really go off on top of my head. Like I said, besides of what the Seneca Nation has provided, this is but I think this is why we're having these conversations, just to look for these resources to see where there is a need and where we can work to help fill that need, or where there's a gap where we can fill that need. But I guess to help answer the question a little bit, I rely a lot on my fellow peers as well. Being a part of the Youth Advisory Board for the Center for Native American Youth is a network of about 10 youth from across Indian country where we meet and we share ideas, talk about solutions to different issues we see in our communities and how we can support the work of this Center for Native American Youth. So having those networks and having those opportunities to discuss issues, sometimes like this with other youth has been key. Creating forums on these issues as well, I think would be helpful, and creating more awareness around this issue.
Thank you so much, Rory, and thank you, Sarah, for your insights. I'm going to read one of the questions that was posted in the chat and invite any of you to take a stab at it. It reads, what about the connection between long-term disability and wealth? In the Tanah Atam community, more than half adults have diabetes, often leading to long-term disability. How can we work to create asset-building approaches that take into account this disability? And also, if appropriate, to invite back Christy and Karen to the conversation as well.
Well, I'll take a minor stab at this, but this is a little bit out of my realm, but I completely agree, because I don't think, certainly at Tanah Atam, that's an issue, but that's an issue in a lot of our tribal communities, right? We have the highest rate of type 2 diabetes and other health issues. I mean, you think about COVID. So I do think that has to be part of the strategy. And again, kind of taking a big picture, and this may not get to the answer necessarily this person posed, but at the big picture, again, when we're talking about assets, right, we are talking about health as part of that, right? And that needs to be thought of when we're talking about asset building strategies and how to make our communities more prosperous, and what is happening with health and well-being and stuff like food systems, right? And those pieces as well have to be taken into consideration. And again, it is terribly complex, because then we've got to deal with the Indian Health Service, which again is federally funded, and the how that works and how that ties in. So again, I'm not an expert, but I do know that when we talk about asset building and we look at workforce development, we know that we have to continue to provide and help get people in our communities with those skills. So doctors, right, and nurses and healthcare professionals, because again, as we're relying on outside sources for that, they obviously don't have our best interest in mind. So again, we know we want to be building that asset from within. So I don't think that was quite the answer, but that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Would anybody else like to chime in?
I think it was, oh, go ahead, Christy. You need it.
I'll come in after you. It's okay.
I was just going to say it's a prime example of allowing us to determine, what wealth looks like. And so I think that what Sarah mentioned was like the social determinants of health. And I think we agree that you have to be healthy in order to grow wealth within your community. And that would be specific to your community on ways to, engage the health fields, right, to support those factors that influence the long-term health of your community. But that's it. So go ahead, Christy.
Okay. Yeah. And just briefly, thinking about what do we do to reduce the barriers to entry for participation in asset building programs, at an individual, family, or community level. And so, whether it be individuals that might have disabilities that, may need extra assistance to be able to, travel to meet face-to-face with a native asset building program administrator, or and trying to think about how, especially during COVID, we reduce barriers to entry for participation. So when we're working with elders that have flip phones and no broadband access, how do we have workarounds for manual entry? How do we be able to take information by phone? How do we not make every possible application be online? So, the role of fintech is fabulous, but it also has to be coupled with the realities of the individuals that we're serving, which, we still have a lot of work to do there. So, one of the challenges, I think, larger picture is, when funders say, well, we just want fintech options. Well, we say we're excited about fintech options, but we need that plus, in-person options where there's a trusted relationship between an individual coming in, but also, being able to help people navigate when they aren't banked and don't have an email address and are on a flip phone, so trying to think about all these barriers and reducing those. So.
And years ago, when certain policies were becoming instituted, like individual development accounts and other types of match savings accounts programs that were embedded in some government programs like TANF and Workforce Investment Act, there were difficulties for people with any kind of disability, because these policies required earned income. And if they did not have earned income or the ability to have earned income, it made it very, very tricky for them to participate in any kind of asset building policy in that vein. I think some of those, many, if not all, but I doubt if all those barriers have been lifted. But I do believe that some of those barriers were addressed. There were several national organizations that worked with people with disabilities who got on board right away and lobbied for that to be, those restrictions to be removed. So I do think that it's the same thing about a delivery system. I think the potential is there for them to participate, but it's just finding the right delivery system, finding the right pathway to take advantage of those policies.
Thank you all so much. Another question that was posed to the group are about economic development and enterprises within tribal communities, an opportunity to create financial wealth and education for tribal members. It says to create cash transfers at the age of 18 for small business creation or education. How can we use enterprise and economic businesses to build generational wealth?
I can take that just as, and we are doing that right within our small communities of growing micro enterprises, and it's working, allowing people the space to imagine a good or service that's needed within their community, and developing that for themselves has been really important. And truthfully, I think sometimes the scale thing is overrated, especially in our communities, because usually in America, small businesses are creating about 2 jobs per small business created. And that's about on average for us here on Cheyenne River as well. So what these individuals are doing is they're starting coffee shops, they're starting restaurants, and they're only able to, create 2 to 12 jobs each. And that's great, right? They're employing those individuals, and we're working with them on quality of jobs and what to do there. But what that allows that individual to do is become a more active civic leader within their community. They're more engaged with what's going on. They're advocating for better policy, better standards, better policing, better fire stations. And we really believe it increases civic engagement once individuals become their own leader and their own boss, and then provide for people. So it's happening on a smaller scale, but it's definitely happening, and it is producing wealth within our community.
Would anybody else like to talk about building generational wealth from tribal enterprises and economic development? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question about the COVID relief funds that have been dispersed into tribal communities. Can you talk, any of you, this is for all the panelists, can you talk about the impact and difference that it's made within our tribal communities? And where are the opportunities to continue investment? Do you believe that the disbursement was equitable? Did it help us address the needs in our community during COVID and as we're continuing to navigate the pandemic?
That's a big question. Oh, Karen, go ahead. Were you going to say something? No? Oh, okay. I saw you were on mute. So I will just share personally what with my tribe, Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, and we are definitely one of the less wealthy tribes. And so with the ARA money that came in through the tribe, there were different things that were done. There was a small, like, per capita distribution, but that's very small. And I saw in the chat that somebody else was asking kind of about gaming tribes and the per cap, and the point that, per cap payments kind of just go right back out, right? They're not building wealth within the community. So kind of along those lines, one of the things that, there were several things that the tribe did, but one of the other things that we've recently done and are looking at trying to potentially draw on some of those funds, what's left anyway, is to start a Pawnee Foundation. We call it the Pawnee Evening Star Foundation. But really, again, more about keeping the assets then within the community and addressing some of those needs from a community perspective. So that's just one example. But again, we don't have, I think the point here is that we don't have the nonprofit infrastructure, that sector as developed as other communities, right? And you absolutely need all of those sectors. You need the nonprofit, the government, and the private sector, right? And so, again, I think entrusting, as been pointed out on this call, Native people, like we know what we need to do, but we need the resources. So, right, we need the resources to be able to do that. So while I think the ARA money has helped some, it's just kind of like the idea behind gaming. Like it's a small one-time thing, and certainly we want to use that to our advantage, but it's not going to solve, these large problems. It's not.
We've tracked it, and on the Cheyenne River, similarly, we've watched it. Individuals have increased their savings accounts. The household income has increased due to different jobs being available to protect the community. They were able to create more jobs with the money, and so individuals have used their money wisely. I'd also just like to point out that the conversation has to be about policy change, because our individuals could be sitting on $25,000 of cash, and they could walk into their local bank and say, I'd like to get a mortgage. And the bank will say, they say this daily, we do not do mortgages within your service area where you live. Like, people are literally being turned away for services. And so you could talk about wealth building on the individual basis, but it really is the structural issues that are holding people back from growing wealth like we imagine it to be happening in America. So I just want to keep pointing that out.
And as Sarah mentioned, so, there was federal funds that came through, but there was also philanthropic money that came through for COVID relief at an individual level. And so ONAC put out funds for emergency cash, assistance, and, trying to think about how to do that again with digital divide and other challenges. But, now we're hearing that even though, COVID has shifted in other ways and that people are still kind of in the middle of a pandemic, those funds are not available any longer. And so we appreciated when they did come through, but there's still people that are struggling and that need additional boost right now. And so we still advocate for more funding that can go out for emergency cash distribution. It was really effective. And, again, it was kind of a drop in the bucket given the amount that we had to be able to get out. But we worked with over 24 partners across the country, so tribes, Native-led nonprofits, to help get those funds out with referrals. And we think that model is scalable. And we have written a report about that. It's also on our website. So just wanted to mention that too.
Thank you so much, everybody. So we've been talking about how we have, systemically been excluded and kind of forced to navigate the space of building financial wealth for our people and within our communities. And I'd like to ask the group, what systems change can our allies be pushing for and supporting us? And let's include accessibility, utilization, and ability to benefit from financial systems.
I was waiting for Christy to jump in. I think the whole point of this conversation, we hope, is to show the breadth and the depth of Native American leadership across the United States, right? And there are multiple organizations that are kind of pulling on a lever that we have the resources to pull on, but reach out to somebody, and we are the best way to make change. And so sometimes that looks like working with one federal department and working on some policy change so that accessibility for use of their federal funds works for the communities that we're serving, right? So it almost has to work on that individual level. And then from there, you can replicate and say, look, the Department of Treasury waived match funds for the organizations that are applying from Native communities, right? So you have precedent that you can then replicate across certain federal departments if that makes sense, right? So there are ways to scale this, but you do really need that one-on-one connection with Native communities. And there are lots of us. There are 574 tribes in America, right? So sometimes it's just forming that relationship and partnership, and we all connect and talk to each other. So find somebody, and we can usually find you the right person to connect with. So that's my basic answer.
Well, and I'll just say, I think one of the toughest issues that we deal with as Indigenous peoples here is this issue of invisibility. And both Lakota and I think Christy and others have touched on this, that, often there's this, like when Lakota was talking about, this creates jobs for 2 people. Well, that's progress and that's good, right? But we often hear, because our communities are small and our population is small, that we're not scaling it right and that we're not worth the investment because they're not getting the ROI. Well, the ROI isn't defined correctly, right? We should define that. And so I think, when people are interested in working with, if it's asset building in Native communities, yes, as Lakota was saying, there's all these different avenues in there, but also you have to listen to the people that are doing the work and understand how to do the work, and not, having been on the board of Native Americans in Philanthropy, not put a lot of strings on the investment and the funding, because then that makes us conform to that, to whatever the directive is in that funding, and we're not actually able to do what we need to do. But we'll do that because we need the resources, but then you're not making any progress and you're really not making any change.
Thank you all so much. The closing question that I would like for, I want to ask Rory first, and then go to Sarah, and then to Lakota. So when we reflect now, 10 years from now, what does financial security look like to our people?
Yeah, so the lack of access to building capital in Indian country and in tribal communities, it was present before the pandemic, and I think right now it's even more pertinent. It's even more an issue right now in communities. But in 10 years, I think starting off and having important conversations like this, we're off to a good start. But the next steps, we need to continue to look to the model, like I said, that the Seneca Nation follows. It goes along with our Haudenosaunee Great Law of Peace. With every decision we make, we must foresee its impact on the next 7 generations. So starting these important conversations, I think, is key. Increasing our visibility and our representation is also key. Sarah and other panelists touched upon. So I'm hopeful for the future. There's a lot of work that needs to be done moving forward, but with a lot of support we have and the support that we can do, and building allies like this and gaining our partners will be so key in moving forward in the future. So I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Rory.
So, and I know we're short on time, so I'll be brief. I definitely think one of the things that I would like to see, and that maybe people outside of our community don't understand, is that a lot of the services that most Americans take for granted don't necessarily exist in, I'm not saying all, but don't necessarily exist in reservation communities. Fire department and sanitation, all these things, maybe they exist, but that money has to come from somewhere, right? And so if we don't have healthy, thriving economies and infrastructure, then that stuff doesn't happen. And it's not something that we take for granted. And then in terms of, urban or off-reservation populations, very similar to everything that everybody's talked here, like, can I buy a house? Can I help save for my children to go to school? I mean, all of the other things that, most people deal with, those are true for all of us.
Lakota?
That's a great question. I think, 10 years, it's a lot. It's not that far into the future. And so I kind of just imagine that we are, all Native nonprofits are funded at the level that we're needed in order to support the build back, to build up our communities from the level that we're at, whatever that is. And we need to be funded at the appropriate level. And even increasing it by 1% would be amazing, right? So I think that would be a great start for 10%, and I also just want to see healthy, happy Native Americans participating in the financial system. You've got Sarah's program, individuals participating in developing products and tools that can properly assess and value the assets that we have, and that we are the makers and creators of our future. So we really need the youth to get involved, and we need more people to step into the space and inspire change and to develop what we need our communities to look like. So that's my vision for 10 years.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you all for joining us today. We have a collective responsibility to reckon with the truth that asset building has historically excluded Native people. And we invite you to invest in Indigenous solutions, which includes investing in Indigenous data, providing Indigenous organizations resources and opportunities to oversample our own populations, to help us build out our own metrics of financial wealth and asset building. And additionally, make sure that we are mindful of the next 7 generations. What are we doing today that will impact the 7 generations to come? Thank you again, everybody. Thank you to ONAC, our partners at FSP, and our relatives that have joined us from the Center for Native American Youth. Liam Lynch and Jessica Oos. Thank you, everybody.